And with that, I'll turn it over to Eduardo Aguilar and Samantha Trans of Children Now. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosanna. And thanks everyone for joining us today. We're really pleased to have so many folks from throughout the state participating in this webinar with us, focused on investing in early childhood education and primarily focused on the local control funding formula and ways to create greater partnerships between the 0 to 5 space and the K-12 space for the benefit of kids. We pulled this webinar together primarily in response to a number of conversations we were having with local advocates in Los Angeles and throughout the state regarding a lot of the good work that's happening in the field over the last year. As many of you may know, we did a similar webinar in February of last year, which had a great turnout and really helped start to kick off some of this work, and we're pleased to see such growth in the field over the last year, and so wanted to talk a little bit about that and then talk about some of the horizons, some of the opportunities on the horizon. So as Rosanna mentioned, I'm Samantha Tran. I'm the Senior Managing Director for Education Policy here at Children Now, and my colleague Eduardo Aguilar is also joining us, and he's been driving a lot of this work up and down the state. We had a chance to take a quick look at the registration list this morning, and there are over 130 people who registered for the webinar, and it really does represent the cross-section of folks who are engaged in this throughout the field. There are folks from school districts, county offices of education, we have 0 to 5 providers, first 5 commissions, local planning councils, there are foundation leaders, there's higher ed and union representation on the call. There's state and local advocates. There's even state agency and legislative staff represented. So really it just demonstrates how focused and how there's just a lot of energy around this work throughout California. So today we're going to talk a little bit about, we have several outcomes that we're going to try to achieve in this conversation. If we can get the slide to move. Let's see. Okay, great. So first, we're going to talk a little bit about some overarching themes for the webinar today. Then we'll do a quick recap on LCFF, and I just want to note that if folks are interested in digging a little deeper on LCFF and the ElCap, the Local Control Accountability Plan that we'll be talking about, we've actually done a couple of other webinars along these lines over the last year or so. So there's a LCFF 101 webinar that's on the YouTube channel, and then there's also the webinar we did last, I believe it's February, on this topic of LCFF and early learning. So those are available as resources if you'd like to go deeper, and also please feel free to ask questions as we move forward as well. Then we'll talk a little bit about some of the research that Eduardo has been doing over the last few months, looking at LCAPs that were approved at the local level. We reviewed about 200 of them, and we're pleasantly surprised with some of the findings around the connections between early learning and school districts. Then we'll dive in and actually try and provide you some tangible tools and next steps for how to facilitate this conversation locally, really with the goal of creating these stronger partnerships between early learning and school districts. And then finally, we'll leave some time at the end to do questions and answers and really hear from folks in the field about what additional information would be useful. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Eduardo.
All right. Well, welcome everybody, and thank you again for joining us today. Sam already kind of mentioned what the overarching themes are for today, but to get into some of the more specifics, we're going to really kind of hone in on the 8-state priorities and show how ECE, early childhood education, really does have can have a direct impact on these, and so you can use that as you're engaging others in your community, so that way you can make that connection for them more explicit. We're also, as Sam mentioned, going to be looking at how districts have been leveraging the LCFF to support ECE, and we are excited about the presence of ECE within the LCAPs that we've reviewed, and so we're going to actually share some examples of them. And then the last piece is really for you to keep in mind as we're going throughout this entire presentation is what we found that within our research and the conversations that we've been having with folks in the field is that there really is no one way to invest or move ECE forward within your district. So wherever you are is where you need to be, and here's an opportunity to really identify what those tangible next steps are going to be for you. All right, so jumping into the quick LCFF review. So we're not going to be able to go into much detail here, but as Sam mentioned, we do have 2 other webinars that you can refer to, and they're all on our YouTube channel and website, so feel free, we definitely recommend you check them out. Going into the kind of overview, really for those of you that are not as familiar with the LCFF yet, the biggest thing that you need to know is that it has changed the way that California funds education. So previous to the LCFF, we focused our funding based on interventions through categorical programs. Now the funds have shifted over into a per pupil spending formula, where school districts are now receiving dollars based on their student populations as opposed to the number of state categoricals that they had applied for and received funding for. So the biggest change in that regard really is focusing the dollars on the most at-risk students. And so being able to the state has allocated additional dollars to serve students that are English learners, low income, and foster youth. So districts, the state recognizes districts need a little bit more support, financial support in getting support to those kids. And so the new funding formula accounts for that. And finally, the ultimate impact of the LCFF is that it really focuses on flexibility and community engagement. And so we're going to be able to talk on to those 2 pieces, and especially the community engagement piece later on in this presentation. So really honing in on the priorities that are included within the local control funding formula. So as we mentioned earlier, there are 8 priorities. The first being they're broken up into 3 big categories for the state. So one category being conditions for learning, the second being pupil outcomes, and the third being engagement. What you see, apologize, if you look at the specific priorities within each of those big bucket areas, you see that for conditions for learning, you're looking at quality, instruction, materials, and facilities. You're looking at adherence to standards, and you're also looking at the availability of courses to meet A through G requirements and to be college and career ready by the time the students graduate. And we'll show how ECE has the potential to impact each one of those, along with those priorities that are under pupil outcomes and engagement. So diving right into the conditions for learning, what you'll see is that, if this presentation cooperates with me, there we go. So these are just kind of a few little notes that we included to highlight how ECE can impact each of the priorities. So in terms of the priority to meet basic services for students, really there's an incredible opportunity to invest in professional development and alignment of the pre-K through K coursework that you're in curriculum that your students are exposed to. And so we definitely will show some language that districts have incorporated to demonstrate that level of investment along the standards. Really, ultimately, kids are able to enter their kindergarten classrooms ready to learn because they've acquired a base of knowledge that will allow them to thrive and move forward. And in the terms of the course access, though this typically tends to apply more so at the high school level, what you find is that through a strong ECE infrastructure in your district, you have the potential to reap the benefit of a reduction in the remedial coursework that is going to be required for your students to take, because they're going to be walking in with a strong foundation that they're going to be able to continue to build on over the years. With regard to the pupil outcomes, really, as there's 130 plus studies that have been conducted over the years to show that there are tangible achievement benefits that students that participate in ECE walk away with. Part of that is just the basic skill set of being able to write their name and know the alphabet, so that when they step into their first kindergarten classroom, they're not having to essentially rerun all the basics for students, and they're able to just move forward. Also within pupil outcomes, you're able to work with your district to identify any kind of specific metrics that you would like to utilize at the local level to measure your progress. And we encourage you to highlight what that progress, how that progress could be measured within your conversations at the local level. And we'll highlight some of those ideas in later on in the presentation. With regard to the final set of priorities, this is, we're having some technical difficulties today, so we apologize. With regard to engagement, one of the priorities within the LCAP is parent involvement. And so what we have found, and what you have probably experienced, is that the parents that tend to engage at an early age tend to stay engaged throughout their child's educational experience. And so EC is a great opportunity to really begin to rebuild that relationship with parents and to create a new culture of engagement for your parents and community as it pertains to education. With regard to pupil engagement, what we also find is that linked to that achievement, because students are not struggling in their classrooms, because they do walk in with that strong foundation, they tend to stay engaged and have an actual interest in learning rather than simply shutting off because they're so far behind for those students that haven't participated in early childhood education. And finally, with regards to school climate, one of the foundations for a quality early childhood education program is really a focus on the development of social emotional skills. And so as students are exposed to these skills within their early childhood education classrooms or experiences, they're able to then take that experience and that skill set into their later years, and thereby making more informed and more productive and healthy decisions. So all great ways, all great examples of how early childhood education really has the potential to impact all of the priorities that are being focused on through the local control funding formula. And of course, the last one that we don't want to forget, previous research had shown that schools and communities had the potential of reaping an 8-to-1 return on investment, or 7-to-1 return on investment. The President's recent State of the Union address showed research, or highlighted research that showed that the potential is actually 8-to-1. And so for every dollar that a district invests in its early childhood education programming, it stands to gain up to $8 worth of savings in the longer term, and that comes in the form of a reduction in remedial services, a reduction in special education identification for students, a reduction in disciplinary action and such. And so it's really, there's no lose for districts that are interested in investing in this critical support. So from there, we're going to jump into a quick review of the findings that we came across within the local control accountability plan this past year. The major thing that we want you to keep in mind with regard to the review is that there was a lot of confusion as to what needed to be included within the LCAP and where it needed to be included. So because of the diversity of narratives that were within the LCAPs, we found it a bit tough to set up a concrete review system. And so what we ended up doing is really just looking at keywords within the LCAPs to help us at least extract and create snapshots of the information related to early childhood education that had been included within the over 200 LCAPs that we reviewed. So what we found was that nearly a quarter of the districts that we reviewed had some language, if not investments, that reference early childhood education. Typically this came in the form of TK investments, so whether it was alignment with their kindergarten classrooms or through third grade or class size reduction, but we were nevertheless really excited to see that it was not ignored by districts throughout the state. So there's a lot of potential to continue to grow from there. The second finding that we, there we go. The second finding is that kind of what we articulated earlier, districts had a whole variety of ways that they had included early childhood education within their LCAPs and had a wide range of investments. So there really is no right or wrong way to jump into it. Wherever your district is currently, it's a great opportunity for you to really discover what that next step is going to be. And finally, as we've been mentioning throughout, we learned that actually in follow-up conversations with many districts that we were aware of high-level or critical investments that they were already making within their LCAP, but were not critical investments they were making in their district that were not present in their LCAP. We followed up and discovered that they simply didn't know that they could actually include those investments within their LCAP. And so we've been working with a lot of districts to make sure that existing efforts that they had underway prior to the LCFF show up within their LCAP moving forward to really show that full breadth of programs that they're providing for their kids. So in helping to kind of structure our review of our findings, we created 3 big buckets that we used to categorize what we found. So the first big bucket is quality, and within that we looked at instruction, assessment, and alignment. We'll go into that in just a minute. The second is actually sort of access and expansion should be the first subheading in there, but along with expansion, facilities, and staff. And the final big bucket that we were looking at was family engagement in the form of creating awareness, engaging parents in the process, and really empowerment. And we'll show some examples of how districts were doing that themselves.
So I think, as everyone on the phone knows, one of the most critical elements of having an impact on kids' outcomes is really delivering high-quality programs. And there's a lot of efforts in the field in the early childhood education space and in the K-12 space to think about quality and to ensure that we're providing really solid programming for kids. As Eduardo mentioned, we're trying to operationalize this in buckets, but obviously these pieces come together in terms of what educators and providers provide for kids. So just a few examples of things that we saw in the field. And then we also have a few ideas of additional practices that folks can consider. And so the way we've approached this is to color code it a little bit. So you'll see that the yellow Post-it notes, or what look like yellow Post-it notes, are existing language that we lifted straight out of LCAP. And then the purple notes are additional ideas for folks to consider as they think about quality and connection between the early learning space and the K-12 space. So one of the first examples that we saw, and we saw pretty frequently throughout the LCAPs, was this idea of providing professional learning opportunities, both for teachers in those early grades, along with early learning preschool teachers and other early learning providers, to think about instruction and to support their professional growth, which is always a useful strategy as you're thinking about program quality. The other piece that we saw that I think again highlights strategies we're seeing in K-12 as well as in the early learning space is to really give educators the time to focus on their practice and to give them class sizes that are manageable and that allow them to really engage with students one-on-one. Obviously, that was a challenge during the recession. We saw large class sizes up and down the state, and we're seeing that districts are taking this piece on and trying to invest on that front. In addition, we saw strategies around identifying local assessments or observation tools that could be used to look at student outcomes. And in a lot of the LCAPs, these were referenced kind of generally, and so a couple of the recommendations we have are some specific strategies that folks can think about. So, for example, there are efforts underway to create a kind of entry level when a child comes into kindergarten, an observation and assessment tool to really help kindergarten teachers and the broader systems understand, are kids ready? Do they have not only the kind of academic skill set, but some of those social, emotional, and physical domains that are really important and integral to a student's success. And so I know that the California Department of Education has a kindergarten readiness tool, the DRDPK, and there are also local tools that people are looking at to see how we can get a better handle on this. And we have examples from districts that have implemented these types of tools, and they're finding, for example, 40% of their kids are prepared on all the domains, and then a subset are struggling on various pieces. So it's a useful tool to help as kids get their footing in the K-12 system and what additional supports they might need. Another important thing to lift up is efforts that are happening in California that are referred to as the Quality Rating and Improvement System. Right now, there are 16 consortiums up and down the state that are providing support around quality improvement efforts in the 0 to 5 space, and this could be a really great opportunity for district leaders and those consortiums to connect and identify strategies to allow their programs to get access to this work. There's kind of a whole continuum of ways that people can get involved, whether that's just getting some general information around what's happening in their community to full-blown being a part of their stakeholder work groups and or actually providing some support and incentives for those programs to be involved in the quality rating and improvement process. So we have programs on the ground happening now. There's also hope that there's going to be expansion on this front. So that's another thing that people can keep a lookout for. And by alignment, I know that word sometimes evokes kind of some psychological noise, so I want to be careful about how we use it. What we're saying here is creating some stronger connections between that 0 to 5 space and the K-12 space, and really respecting the value add that both have in that context. And so it's, how do we create stronger communication and formal arrangements so that it's a more seamless process for kids as they move from a high-quality early learning space into the K-12 system, where it feels like, again, this continuum. And so we saw examples of creating some formal connections between local preschool programs, whether that was within the district or other community partners, and K-12 teachers to just kind of articulate what they were doing, providing support around various materials that connect those two spaces. So again, these are useful strategies, some curriculum mapping and technology to help support some of that integration work. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Eduardo for the next piece.
Thanks, Sam. And so going to access, and some of this builds off of what Sam just shared. Really when it comes to access, there's three sections or three kind of categories we're looking at: expansion, facilities, and staff. Under expansion, what we found was that really folks were already looking at investing, again, in elevating their ability to measure quality and to build on it. And so what we found, and especially in follow-up with conversations that we had with many district and community folks, is that what they want to do is figure out what they're doing right and do more of it. And so it's definitely an opportunity for you to grow your programming by focusing on how you're measuring quality locally, and there are some tools out there that we encourage you and we'll connect you to on our website. The other expansion piece that we saw come up several times within the LCAP review that we did were investments in transitional programs over the summer for incoming kindergartners. And so that tended to go anywhere from a week-long program to a 2 to 3 week program that also had an adult education component. And so you'll see that some of these at the very bottom of the post-it have some dollar figures associated with them. That's because those investments were included within the LCAP. Those that do not have those dollar figures underneath, it's because no dollar figures were provided within the LCAP. So as you're engaging with your district, one huge opportunity, along with simply listing existing efforts within the LCAP, is to make sure that actual dollars get allocated to the investments or to the actions that are included within your LCAP. So, and finally, the other expansion piece is really creating a stronger connection between the preschool and child care space to make sure that there are the services and supports that are available to families really do meet the need, so that it isn't just a half-day program and then parents have to figure out what to do for the remainder of the day. But if you can only start with the half-day program, that's a great start. So, figure out where your district is and see how you can move forward. With regard to facilities, is always kind of a challenge. And so what we found is there are districts that are looking at creating cost analysis of what it would actually, the investment that they would need to make to get their district up and running to be able to support kindergarten, all of their classrooms. And so this is a great starting point also for those of you that are looking to either expand or begin a program in your district, is take a look at what classroom spaces are available, what resources do you currently have to count on to be able to bring in and activate those supports as quickly as possible. And really, along with facilities, is looking at, when you're expanding any of your current programming, making sure that you are doing so in a manner that meets that community need and interest, and so that you're not simply growing programs in communities or in schools that have traditionally had them, but that are not seeing the need that once existed, and that you're really placing those services and supports in the communities and schools that will thrive as a result of having access to them. And so that little blue post-it at the bottom really kind of is a suggestion that we have, is conduct a needs assessment for your district so that you really understand where the opportunities lie, so that you can begin moving the ball forward for ECE in your community. And so the last bucket under access is really staff. And as we know, over the last several years, this has been a big challenge for many districts, and have cut anything from just cutting hours for instructional aides to cutting full-on teachers and instructional aides from the classroom. And so if you're at a point where you're looking to rebuild, it's a great opportunity for you to reactivate some of those positions that have been lost over the last several years. And if you do not have, if you're finding yourself at a point where you're just starting this up, reaching out to some of your colleagues in other districts to look at what their HR packets consist of, so that way you have some ready-to-use materials as you begin to really embark on this path. And really, it's critical that as you're looking at staff, that it's not just about bodies in the room, as you all know. Really, it is about recruiting, hiring, and retaining a strong group of individuals that can help achieve the type of outcomes that we know our kids can achieve and deserve to achieve. So switching over to family engagement, and Dr. Sam on that.
So, in addition to the programming itself, one of the strong value adds that early childhood programs provide is a space for parents to engage. I mean, I know when my daughter, was transitioning into preschool, I was very engaged because they're so little. You want to be with them. You want to make sure that this transition is going to go well for them. And so there's a real opportunity to build a rapport with parents and to create some dynamics that encourage parents to stay involved and to feel like they're a part of the process. And so we saw many districts move in this direction of really lifting up and prioritizing family engagement. And so, that included things from, just making parents aware of what the programs that were available and to provide some greater supports around engaging in pre-K. We also saw, and this is something that was really exciting for our staff as we saw this play out, some investments and focus on providing parent education at homes and actually doing some home visits and connections, which can be a great way to provide support. We also think that there's a real opportunity here to invest in ways to engage our English learner parents and be very intentional about translation services. We were seeing that a lot in the conversations around community engagement on LCFF, and I think this is an investment that not only helps in the early learning space, but obviously K-12. So that's really useful. A couple other examples that we saw was some collaboration efforts to create learning communities to help parents understand some of the new requirements in K-12 around Common Core and helping to bring them into the K-12 setting. We also saw various types of preschool programs that helped create some of this bridge, and that there was a parent component, the bridge issues that Eduardo was mentioning earlier. In addition, this is a great opportunity to provide some professional development, so teachers and administrators around culturally appropriate communication and engagement with families, and really starting that early and often as we create these linkages. Finally, on the issue around empowerment, we saw lots of support for parents to actually engage in various modules to help them kind of learn how to participate. And a couple of examples might include some of these parent coaching models that are listed here, and there are others that really support parents to have an active voice in the process of shaping programming and some of the larger decision making, which is again a major theme within the context of LCFF. So with that, I'm going to transition over and just talk a little bit about some next steps and ways that we can operationalize all these great ideas. I mean, it's one thing to kind of lay out that districts are doing some interesting stuff. We have several examples, but for a local advocate or even for district leaders, the question then becomes, so then what? How do I move from where we are now to increasing our presence and connections between the early learning space and K-12? And so what we thought we would do is distill it down to just a few tangible steps, not the end-all be-all, but or everything that you can do, but just a few ways that you can move the ball as a way to jumpstart the conversation, because so much of this really does come down to what is the local context and the nuances in your community and the relationships that are there. And then good programming often develops from those seeds. So in order to provide some sense of it, I think this kind of goes back to a theme that we've consistently had through our webinars around LCFF and our support to local communities and advocates who are engaged in this work, that first and foremost, you need to know your local context, right? it is going to be unique in each community, and there are some specific things that are good pieces of information as you walk in the door, or even as a district leader is thinking about expanding programs, some good information that would help in those foundational pieces. One, first and foremost, know the kids, know what the needs are in that 0 to 5 space. Where are there currently programs being offered? What are the types of services? Are we providing the types of services that families actually need? Do we have a sense for where programs are on that quality improvement process? So there's just a lot of need to unpack, what that local context is and where our kids are in the 0 to 5 space. Another important key piece to understand is to again understand how districts are doing on the fiscal side. As we referenced a couple of times already in this webinar, during the recession, we lobbied some very deep cuts on public education, and we are just now starting to recover. Last year was a good year in terms of the investment front, and this year will be a very good year on that front too, but we still are struggling to get back up to our 2007 pre-recession levels. And so being mindful about the available resources and knowing what resources, as they become available, how to be really creative and to support some quality investments. And as you would expect, we would strongly urge some investments on this front because of the yield that can happen in later years and for kids. And then, more tactically, identify based on all that information, what is the next step forward? And again, here are a couple of strategies that might help you figure out what that next step is.
All right, so as we dive into this section, we really wanted to make sure that the information we presented was tangible steps that you can actually take, and shifting away from the theory and looking really at the action. And so here before you, you see that there are 3 very concrete steps that you can take, especially over these next couple of months, which are absolutely critical in regards to getting engaged in the process within the development of your district's LCAP. So the first step you can take is document the ECE need within your LCAP, and we'll go over some strategies and channels for you to be able to do that. The second step you can take is make sure that if your district is making investments in early learning, that it includes those within their actual LCAP. And again, we'll be able to share some tools that we've developed or resources to help inform what that process looks like. And finally, this is kind of an opportunity for those of you that are positioned to really kind of help your district move in a very strong way in support of ECE if they're not currently there yet, is really to engage your board as a key ally in that process. And we have some tools and supports available that we're going to be covering in just a minute to help you in that. So starting with my apologies, I'm going to switch over to Sam on this piece.
And we just wanted to list up a couple of process things in this context to know that where there are some formal venues for you to engage in this conversation. So as many of you are likely aware, the way that the LCFF law is constructed, every school district needs to develop a local control and accountability plan. And in the context of the statute, there are several places where there are kind of formal input. And then we're also really excited to see that there are many districts throughout the state who've embraced this work and really trying to expand that beyond just the baseline or the most basic of engagement strategies, and really thinking through how can they engage their community in more systematic ways, whether that's meetings at site visit or at school sites, several district level advisory or district level meetings that are structured to bring people engaged in each part of the process, or working with local partners to have informational and engagement sessions off-site. The 2 formal kind of venues that are in the statute that are required, though, is districts having 2 types of parent committees. There's a general district advisory committee, and that includes both parents and teachers and others, administrators from school sites. It primarily focuses on low-income parents to make sure that they have a voice and a venue to engage. And then there's also an English language learner advisory committee that similarly has this kind of statutory construct. And so the district needs to bring a draft of the plan to these 2 committees, get formal input from them before taking it to the board to then review at a meeting and then later adopt with both the LCAP and the budget. So that's kind of the formal structure, but again, I think we're excited to see that many communities are going much more beyond that and really trying to engage local participants. And it's important to understand what your local timelines are, and I know Eduardo will talk a little bit about that in just a second.
And one last thought on that last slide. The distinction that we need to provide is that a lot of folks, there's some lack of clarity in the field as to whether your efforts should be focused at the school level or at the district level. Currently, the way that the LCFF is structured, we really encourage you, of course, to do both, but if you had to pick one, the district is where you need to target your efforts. And so there's some confusion around school site plans. Those are wonderful documents, and we encourage you to be a part of that and help at the local decision-making at the school site level. But really where the LCAP discussions and what ends up in the LCAP, where that's happening is at the district level. So the two committees that Sam identified, the DAC and the ELAC, have some iterations at the school site, but you really need to focus your efforts at the district level for those two. So now shifting over to the current slide that we're on and really helping document the existing ECE investments within your LCAP. This is an opportunity for you to really essentially create an inventory of the many supports or lack of supports that are available in your district for early learning families and kids. And so one of the things that we really encourage you to do is in developing that inventory is identify any kind of partnerships that exist within your community. I mean, this includes explicit partnerships that providers have with the district, or even just looking at a quick scan of the child care and preschool, whether they be private or public offerings that exist within your district. And so that will give you a sense of where these resources currently lie, and as well as identify any gaps that exist, so that as you're engaging in that dialogue, you're really engaging at a very intentional and direct level, rather than kind of coming to the table with this blanket, we need it at every site, which is ideal, but as you're building this system in your district, may not be the most practical way to approach it. So in support of that work, the second suggestion that we have up there is really crafting some succinct language. And for those of you that have had the pleasure of looking at the LCAPs, you've probably observed that the level of information presented within them is very limited. And so you're really looking at some LCAPs that are allocating millions and millions of dollars and have one sentence that states how those dollars will be used. And so that is something that we're hoping to continue to build out with folks in the field over these next years to bring greater clarity as to those investments. But for now, it's really about finding ways to just succinctly capture what type of action your district will be taking in support of ECE. And we're in the process of developing a snapshot of language from districts throughout the state that we've looked at, so that you have some tangible kind of plug-and-play language to incorporate in your LCAPs. And then as we switch over, that's, this is just a quick mention of what we're going to be doing, but this document will be sent out to you all in the next coming weeks. For those of you that are registered in the call, you will be receiving this document along with some others that we'll highlight in just a second via email.
Yeah, so as Eduardo mentioned, we're in addition to the PowerPoint slides, we want to make sure to actually put into your hands some of this direct language so that it mostly just generates ideas and gives you a sense of some of the exciting things that are happening throughout the state as you start to tailor your local efforts. The next piece of advice that we have around engaging and helping to move this forward is to really work closely with district leadership, and in particular working with your local school board members. My prior life, actually before coming to Children Now, I worked at the California School Boards Association for many years and worked with governance teams, so superintendents and school boards. And they are in this situation now where, in the context of LCFF, a lot of the authority that has been systematically kind of brought to the state level is now resting in their hands. And so there's much more flexibility for them to create coherent programs locally and to be much more responsive to local community need and the students that they're trying to serve. And so there is this great opportunity, and it does create a chance for boards and superintendents and district leadership and at the school sites to have much more ability to shape it. And ultimately, at the end of the day, as we go through the LCAP review and development process, it is the local school board that will adopt that budget and adopt that local plan. And so engaging your school board and working to get their support around early learning in particular is a good way to begin the efforts. And one of the strategies that we've seen work, and we know that in Los Angeles they used this strategy, which was great, and I've seen it used in multiple other issue areas locally to kind of move the work, is to first start conceptually around what you're trying to achieve. And a school board resolution has the ability to really lift up the why. Why should we care? Why should we do this? And then to provide some direction to staff and some clarity to the community about, so then what? What's next? And so we're pulling together a resolution that, again, we'll share in about a week or so when we send out the PowerPoints and the other LCAP language that really lays out those things. So, why should we invest in early learning? What are the key returns that we see for kids and for families, for communities, and for the school? And then what are some tangible strategies that we can use to move the ball forward? And again, as we recommended throughout this webinar, really taking the time to assess what's the right next step in your community. Maybe it is pulling together a working group of district leaders, other early learning providers, some community members to dig into that needs assessment and develop the sense for what's happening in the community and determine what are the right next steps in terms of building out relationships, or maybe it's putting in a assessment tool so that you have a sense for, do we even know if our kids are coming in ready, and how do we know? And so it might be that front end of the continuum, or it might be that you've been developing programs and have partnerships for many years, and so now it's really down to that issue of access and improving quality. And so it's in your next local school bond, you're going to provide more facility space. You're going to provide greater access, ideally for wraparound, full day care. You're going to engage in the QRIS and really work on that continuous improvement process. I mean, there are multiple ways to plug in, but a board resolution is a good organizing tool that helps prompt the conversation and helps narrow in on what level of support and where the board wants to move next. So it's an area that we think could be really useful. The key strategy, and I'm going to turn this over to Eduardo, is to do it at the right time. And I'll tell you, the time is now. So let me switch it over to Eduardo.
Yeah, so to support you in these efforts, we're along with the many other documents that we're making available, we do have a ready-to-use and ready-to-download budget timeline document that we'll be sending out to you. So for those of you this is your first kind of foray into this work, we really encourage you to look at this because there are implications for the development of the LCAP that are relate to the budget process. And so we encourage you to check this out because really the budget decision making that will directly impact LCAP begins in the fall. And so the kind of disconnect that's happening right now statewide is that many of the district LCAP engagement efforts aren't beginning until January, which at that point many of the decisions that pertaining to the district's budget have already, at least on a tentative basis, been made. And so really the level of engagement needs to begin happening as early as September, ideally in August, so that you're creating that understanding of the process and then engaging folks in that needs assessment moving forward. And so this is a great document that both shows you what's going on using the seasons format, what's going on in the fall, winter, spring, and summer, and tangible actions that you can take during those key windows to be able to move ECE forward in your district. The other document that we're going to be sending out next week is a sample school board resolution. So if this is your first time really kind of engaging on this level as well, here's an opportunity to look at some concrete language that you can actually modify to meet your district-specific needs and the opportunities that exist without having to necessarily start from scratch. And so this will be another document that will be sent out to you in the next few weeks. So with that, we've actually reached our question and answer session. And we have a few questions that have been sent our way. And please feel free, if there's anything else that comes up for you, to go ahead and send it over using the question box within the within the presentation. And for those questions that we're not able to get to, we're going to make sure to find ways to also respond to those questions, whether it be on our website or via the email. So thank you all, and we're going to shift over to the questions now. So the first question that came in is, will this presentation be available after the session to download or look at again? The answer is yes. Almost within the next 24 to 48 hours, it'll be up on our YouTube channel, as well as up on our website as soon as possible, along with the documents that we're going to be providing.
The next question is, and I'll read it verbatim, it says, how can community-funded districts and those districts who do not qualify for supplemental funding be supportive but realistic? And this is in response to kind of that, the way that the LCFF funding works, and as we kind of grow into the new formula and the new resources, districts are going to be growing in their funding throughout the state. But some districts will be receiving more because of their student population. So they have more high-need kids, low-income English learners, and foster youth, and so they'll be receiving supplemental and concentration funds. And those funds are really a useful one to tap into, because we know that our high-need kids especially benefit from early learning. For a district that is growing back more slowly and most of their dollars are coming into the base funding, that's an important reason why advocates need to work with their districts to get a good sense for how their resources are coming back as the state invests on that front. In response to the specific question, I think there are still a lot of ways, even if a district is growing back slowly, to partner. And the other wonderful thing about early learning is that there are other funding streams you can tap into, and we've seen many districts do that, whether they're drawing down state preschool dollars, whether or not they're receiving child care dollars, either directly or in their partners, their local provider partners, figuring out ways that they can connect those resources that are coming into communities with the general district funds. And so I think some practical strategies that are relatively low cost but potentially high yield are, creating some space for our early learning providers and either site administrators and teachers to start communicating, just begin those early relationships to see where there might be ways to have supportive practices. Say for example, it's hosting a meeting for parents, as they transition from preschool into the kindergarten space. That might be a good early partnership that again builds relationships and then could build something out over time. I think there are things like that could be really useful. And one of the things I would recommend for districts that are interested in this space is to connect with their local First Five Commission as well as their local planning councils, because those entities also, they have a wealth of information about what's happening for kids in that 0 to 5 space, and they may have some other strategies for how to plug in on local efforts that are emerging, that also may have resources available. So I think there are a lot of ways to move forward, but I do think it's going to be connecting with some of the local leaders in your community.
And so Sam gave some great suggestions for leveraging the funding. The next question has to deal with simply getting language into the LCAP related to ECE. So the exact question is, if a district did not include ECE investments in LCAP, is it too late to approach district to include? The answer is no, right? So currently where the process is districts should be engaging their community to develop, to do a reflection on their previous year's LCAP, and make any kind of modification that they need to make in order to submit the next year's plan by July 1st. And so, no, it is not too late to engage. It's critical to be involved in that process, actually. And so one of the concrete steps that you can take is check out your district's website. I've actually been very pleasant to track. It's been very pleasant for me to track how districts are beginning to elevate LCFF within their websites. When we first started this process 6-7 months ago, very few district websites had any information related to the LCFF, or if they did, it was a very quick blurb and a link to West Ed videos. What I'm finding is that a lot of districts are now taking the time to actually embed district-specific resources within their LCAP pages and elevating LCAP and LCFF as a main navigation link on their website. So you can definitely start there. If your district website does not present any information as to upcoming meetings, reach out to the district office. It may take a few questions, and working through a few folks to get actual information, but be patient and keep at it so that you can actually be a part of that decision-making process. The other thing is being able to, as we identified earlier, identify the channels through which you can actually make sure that ECE is included within the LCAP. So at the most level, there's an opportunity to make sure that ECE is included as a need within your district, and that can happen either by participating within community dialogue that your district is hosting and lifting that up as a need in your community, as well as connecting with the district advisory committee and the English Learner Advisory Committee. Those two committees are required by the statute to have the superintendent respond to their questions. So if you can connect with either of those committees and a specific member on them, you can actually ask them to submit a formal question to the superintendent and say, how are we going to invest in early childhood education this upcoming year? And the superintendent has to respond to that in writing. And typically, some districts have been including those responses within their overall submission package. So it is not too late to engage at the district level in the development of the LCAP, and we highly encourage you guys because this is the time right now.
Yeah, along those lines, I mean, from a process perspective, these are 3-year plans, but they need to be updated annually. And we all know that this last year, we were, as many of us joke, and it's probably not funny for those in the field, is that we were all flying the plane as we were building it, right? We were developing the regs for what these LCAP templates would look like, even as districts were reaching out to their communities and beginning to develop these plans. And so, this was the first shot at what an LCAP could look like. We learned a lot from what we saw in the field, and there was actually revisions to the plan, to the template, so that hopefully this coming year it's a little bit more coherent in terms of relating your goals and your outcomes and your investments all kind of in one place. Again, I think we'll learn a lot from how it plays out throughout California, and hopefully not make massive revisions, because that can be jarring for the field, but continue to tweak with it and make sure that it really is a useful document for locals. So that process was happening, the regulatory process was happening even as communities and districts were trying to fill this out. And so I think all of that to say there's a world of opportunity as districts and communities go back and look at those plans and say, okay, well, we got this one done, but how can we refine it to actually make it useful locally and reflect what we're really doing? And there is an actual process for that, because these will be updated annually.
One of the questions just came in. It's slightly longer, so I won't read it verbatim, but it just deals with how do you reach out to new parents so that they understand how critical it is to really connect with these services and supports at a very early age, because there's some really significant brain development that's happening even in utero. So really what the LCAP presents is an opportunity to engage folks in that dialogue and to begin building those partnerships in the community that do provide services to new parents or folks that are thinking about being pregnant, so that there is a level of awareness that's being developed at the local level within communities, so that there is a clear understanding about how critical it is for them to access these types of services, and then connecting with the necessary services to make sure that they actually get delivered to them.
And I think there's a whole continuum of kind of low-touch to high-touch strategies on that front. I mean, there is kind of on the lower end of it, putting out information via their websites and through partners and their newsletters and the like. There's kind of that space in the middle where you have district leaders and early learning leaders actually in communities presenting on the importance of this. Just a few references to it at local meetings that are occurring is really important, because it sets a signal about why this is so critical. And the more high-touch strategies, again, that we're seeing in a few communities is really developing a robust kind of home visiting program for new moms and new parents, and really providing a qualified nurse who can go in and talk to parents about the importance of those early years, and some very specific strategies for how they support their kids' development, and connecting them to the types of child care and then ultimately preschool type programs that are available in the community. I mean, I think there are a lot of leaders throughout the state who are focused on this issue and trying to figure out how best to reach out. And we are well served if we do that in concert and try and connect the dots between our different efforts. So again, going back to that whole relationship piece of building connections between district leaders and the 0 to 5 community. Well, with that, we really appreciate everyone sticking with us. As we were looking at the metrics, people stayed on the line and engaged in this with us. I'm trying to go to our next pretty picture. So when we send out this PowerPoint, we will you'll see links to different resources that are available, and I'll show you that real quick, as well as our contact information if you have any follow-up questions. In addition, right after we end this webinar, there's going to be a survey that's sent out to everyone. We would really value your input on what worked, what information was helpful, what additional types of support would be useful, whether that's in the terms of actual tools or in-person meetings or connecting folks at the local level between who are engaged in this work. So we value your partnership, and thank you again for participating in this meeting with us.